I'm going to get started, everyone, and I really appreciate you all being here today to our Stewards of the Beautiful Land webinar, another in the series that we've been doing for the most of the summer, and I'm excited to be your host today. So we will. I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that we have going on, and then we'll get right into the presentation. So I know you're anxious to hear what Doug has to say. So let me get going with my slides here. Go. There we go. So first off, welcome. I also want to point out to you that there are other ways to keep up with what we're doing. If you're interested in any of our field days or any additional webinars that are coming up, please visit our webpage, Trees Forever, and then the Stewards page. You'll find that on our webpage, and so that'll get you some more information about what we're doing and when. And there's another way to keep up as well. We have a Facebook group that is a Trees Forever Stewards of Beautiful Land Facebook group. And so that information that I just talked about will also be there, but also you can interact with the group, ask questions, share information, see what's gone on at some of the past field days. It's a great way to keep up with what's going on. And a way to find out about what presentations are coming up. So on our agenda for today, we're gonna talk obviously a little bit about some of this background stuff, and then we're gonna get right into, so basically two things: some backgrounding, some upcoming events, and then the presentation on native birds and native plants, which you'll be getting to here a little bit. So we have some upcoming webinars, and the next one will be on the 20th of August, and then there's additional ones coming up in September as well. The next one will be on, I think I could let Bree handle this, but she will be talking with another person about landscaping with natives. So a great way to think about what you might be able to do in your own yard or in a facility that you may be working with. And so it'll be an interesting and I'm sure very good webinar. So other things coming up. So next week, Thursday in Cass County, there will be we'll be taking a look at prairie planting, large scale prairie planting and maintenance. And excuse me, the county roadside manager from the adjacent county, Adair County, will be there to share what their program involves and how they do some of these large scale plantings and how they maintain their roadsides. And that will be at the Outdoor Learning Center just south of Messina. And then the following Wednesday on the 20th, Marshall County will be doing a prairie walk, and I'm looking forward to this one as well, on the Marietta Sand Prairie. Sand prairies are not the most common prairie, at least they weren't originally, and a whole different suite of plants and animals, just an interesting type of prairie to take a look at. Will be a great field day as well. And then the following Wednesday, the 27th, Cerro Gordo, they'll be having a prairie tour and an invasive species removal event, and so that'll be at the Lime Creek Nature Center starting at 5:30. So those are some upcoming some upcoming field days that you're welcome to take a look at. Again, this is just a shot from our webpage. This is what you find on our Stewards page. I'm sorry, I need to go back. I just jumped. Sorry, folks. But this is what you'd find. Obviously, many of these are done already, the field days. So looking at the 14th, 20th through the end of September. But just check it out. If you want to attend, just click on it and you can sign up. Or if you forget to sign up, you certainly are welcome to show up day of. And then, as Bree mentioned earlier to some of you who are getting on, as a reminder, if you wish to ask questions, and we encourage you to do that, do so in the questions line. Just type them in. We cannot see you or hear you, so this is how you can interact with us and ask the questions that you want to have answered. We'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation, so some of your questions may be able to answer as we're going along, but some that may be more specific for Doug are things that you certainly can ask, and we'll present to Doug at the end of the presentation. So please ask your questions there. And then with that, I want to introduce Doug. And so I'm just going to read a little bit of a bio, a little bit of background, and then we're going to get Doug on to talk about our main presentation. So if you don't know Doug, or if you do know Doug, he is currently the president of Iowa Audubon. And so he actually started this all probably before he went to school, but his school came as a BS and MS in wildlife ecology from South Dakota State University. And then he spent over 38 years, 38 and a half to be specific, at the Iowa DNR, working with wildlife. I met Doug on the REAP Alliance committee, talking about, and always was involved with Audubon. So Doug is currently retired, but he is still president of the Iowa Audubon and also represents Iowa on the advisory board for the National Audubon Upper Mississippi River Regional Office. So that covers Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. So enough of me talking, folks. I'm going to stop showing my screen, and we'll get Doug's presentation up here. So Doug, when you're ready. Perfect.
Okay. Ready to go ahead and start?
Definitely. We can hear you very well.
Okay, well, we will start with the talk today. I've never done a webinar before, so this is a little fun for me to try today. I've given a lot of talks on wildlife over the years when I was with DNR and for Iowa Audubon, but this is my first attempt at doing a webinar. So I hope this is going to go over well for everyone. And our subject today is going to be native plants and native birds in Iowa. And maybe you've heard a bird like that, which is really a very beautiful prairie bird. That is the sound of a western meadowlark, which has one of the most beautiful prairie bird songs there is. So with that, we'll go on to start talking about prairie plants and prairie birds and why native prairies are so critically important for grassland birds. Here in Iowa, more than 30 species of birds specifically for native prairies. Now, there's a lot of other birds that also use the prairies, so that's helpful for them too. But we're going to kind of concentrate today on native prairie plants and the birds that like to use these prairies in particular. The problem with so much of Iowa is that since the 1850s, 1860s in there, when croplands began to spread across the state, and really it wasn't too bad until probably after World War II, and then so much of Iowa completely began to change to almost probably 90% corn and soybeans. And so that really resulted in a loss of a lot of prairie and grassland habitat. And that means that in a lot of land that looks like this in the picture here today, that kind of land can sustain perhaps only 1 to 5 species and not any more than that. And back in 2019, the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology published this particular picture that I've used in a lot of different programs because it's so critically important to show what's happened to the different birds all across North America. And a lot of this is due to habitat loss, and a lot of it is also due to climate change and other things. But you can see when you look across this, the things that are the biggest concern are the loss of grassland birds. Since 1970, over 53% of there's been a 53% decline in our grassland bird populations in North America. And actually, this picture was from 2019 also, and that's increased even a little bit more now. Just showing here what has happened to eastern meadowlarks in grasslands since 1970. about 75% of the eastern meadowlarks have disappeared. Western meadowlarks have disappeared also, but not in quite such big numbers. So before we get into looking at the prairie, I want to show you a little bit of differences in the types of habitat that we have right here in Iowa and the quality of them. We'll start out with forests. When I started working for DNR, I know at that time in the 1970s and into the 80s probably, a lot of forests were being removed in Iowa, continued to be cut down, and the acreage of forest continued to decrease. Probably in the 90s or a little bit later, things begin to change around a little bit, and there's been a lot more enthusiasm on protecting forests, reestablishing forests. DNR is doing that, county conservation boards are doing that, and of course the Nature Conservancy and groups like Trees Forever that just really want to see trees forever in Iowa. And so the forest habitat is getting into kind of good shape. It could be a little better. It's got to go better, but it's not too bad. And wetlands, you can see, are okay. And actually, this is quite a bit of an increase from about 30 to 40 years ago. Before 1985, wetlands were in extreme losses across the state. They were being drained for everything until there were some new federal laws that protected them. And then with a lot more work by Iowa DNR, Ducks Unlimited, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, since the mid-1980s, there's been probably at least a couple of thousand small wetlands, even a few large ones, restored across Iowa. So wetland diversity, wetlands are improving, and so are some of the water birds that use those. We're seeing more ducks, more shorebirds on a lot of these areas. So that's doing better. We want to see that get better too. But what we're going to concentrate on today is grasslands, prairies in particular, because they are in bad, bad shape. So that's where we're going to go from here. We're going to start talking about what you want to see for prairies, what kind of plants should be there, and what kind of birds these are going to protect in Iowa. Now, we'll kind of start out with the types of shorter grassland or mid-grass prairies that are not real common in Iowa, but there are certain types of birds that prefer those types of things. This is a photo I took several years ago when I worked in Northwest Iowa of Kaler Prairie in Dickinson County, which is an extremely important prairie, one of the 3 or 4 very most important completely native prairies in all of Iowa. In fact, you can see by the monument on the rock here, which is at the entrance point into Kaler Prairie, if you ever go visit there, because this is a nationally recognized natural historic site. Done, I believe, by the National Park Service at one time. So places like Kaler Prairie and a few other of our protected native prairies in Iowa are just extremely important. So we'll start out talking about this kind of prairie because Kaler Prairie is not just a tall grass prairie. It's a mix of shorter grass, really mid-grass prairie plants, because it is on glacial moraine, the famous Iowa glacial moraine, the Des Moines Lobe. This is where the Des Moines glacial lobe last retreated from Iowa 10, 12,000 years ago, and it left a lot of rocky, hilly ridges. So some of the ridges here are full of rocks and sand, and don't grow things quite as well as a moister tall grass flat prairie does. And so this has some particular types of birds that like it. And you can find these types of prairies on some of the high spots in the Luss Hills and way up in the northwest corner of Lyon County, some places like that, where it's beginning to transfer just a little bit more like what you would find in the Dakotas, the mid-Dakotas, Nebraska, places like that. So some of the more common grasses that you'll find in places like this, mid-grass prairies, would be things like little bluestem. Now it's very common in big tall grass prairies too, but it's really a lot more common in mid-grass prairies. and other plants, other grasses like side oats grama, which is a plant. You can see the seeds on this. This is very important for the birds that are feeding in these prairies. They eat insects, they eat seeds. And so some of these grasses that are produced naturally in those prairies are extremely important for the birds that live there. And then we get into other kind of plants and wildflowers, things like prairie sage. This is common in many prairies all across Iowa, but a little bit more common in those midgrass prairies in northwest and the northwest corner of Iowa. And then plants like spiderwort, which are actually found in prairies all over the country, just about, or all over the Midwest, everything from tall grass prairies to short grass prairies and even into woodlands, the edges of woodlands. Butterfly milkweed. It's also a plant which is found in many tall grass prairies, but it does a little better in shorter and midgrass prairies because it isn't dominated by the height of the prairie grasses. So you'll very often see more of these blooming in areas like Kaler Prairie. And these things produce a lot of nectar that insects are going to be feeding on, and the insects that feed on that will introduce birds to come and feed on the insects. So these plants are just extremely important. Things like black-eyed Susan, which has little seeds that the birds will like to feed on. And this is also common in all different sizes of prairie, but it's really very common up there in Dickinson County in places like Kaler Prairie. Another plant that's common everywhere, every kind of prairie, is wild bergamot, bee balm. These are also more common name, bee balm or horsemint because of its beautiful minty-like fragrance. Well, these types of plants tend to want to attract, or do attract, I should say, birds that prefer a little bit shorter grass prairies. And so the first one I'm going to start out here with you for today is this photo of a grasshopper sparrow, which tends to like midgrass to shorter grass prairies the most. It will be found in tall grass prairies, and it will also be found in cattle pastures if they're not overgrazed. So even with more domestic grasses, if a pasture is not overgrazed, or you have a non-native grassland that's just kind of been let grow a little bit, you will have grasshopper sparrows around that. And they are in there to feed on the insects and to nest in those shorter little bit shorter grass prairies that they prefer. Now, this is a prairie grasshopper sparrow I took a photo of a couple of years ago. It just happens that yesterday I was in Guthrie County and I got a far greater portrait of a grasshopper sparrow than this one. So anyway, bird photography is kind of one of my hobbies in retirement, along with working for Iowa Audubon. So most of the photos you're going to see here today are all photos of birds that I've seen in Iowa over the years. Horned larks are a bird that prefers shorter grass areas that a lot of people in Iowa may not be familiar with, because they're going to be very hard to see in the summer. They're going to be nesting in short grass prairies, or believe it or not, this is one of the very few birds, one of those maybe 1 to 5 birds that will actually be found nesting sometimes in places like crop fields, shorter crops. They will be in corn stubble fields in the fall after the corn is harvested. You'll see them in cornfields flying across gravel roads. And then in the winter, when a lot of birds tend to move down from Canada, they actually a lot of these horned larks move into Iowa, where we will see far larger numbers of them in the short grass prairie areas and even in the corn stubble fields in Iowa. So as you drive down a gravel road in the winter with a little bit of snow on it, you'll probably see horned larks like this. And you may see flocks of them from maybe 20 or 30 to several hundred in a flock. But believe it or not, some of these are actually nesting in Iowa in our short grass prairies and midgrass prairies every year, and even some of our crop fields. Then we go to the western meadowlark, which is the one that I had singing for you there with one of the opening slides. This is a bird that's found in basically the northwestern half of Iowa is where the most of them are. So basically everywhere from central Iowa on to western Iowa and northwest Iowa, we find the most of them. Sometimes you'll find a few of them in eastern Iowa, but not too many because they prefer the shorter grass prairies and a lot more prairie as well. So as you get on into the Dakotas and Nebraska, you'll find thousands of these birds everywhere, on the fields, perched on lines, perched on poles like this. But in northwest Iowa, in the prairies is where you tend to find more of these. And actually, when I worked in northwest Iowa for DNR and lived in Lyon County, we saw very, very few eastern meadowlarks there. It was almost all western meadowlarks. About 99% of what we saw up there in the northwest corner were western meadowlarks. And here's one that might surprise people, that actually was historically a nester in Iowa's shorter to mid-grass prairies a century ago, and that was the burrowing owl. Now, you've probably seen pictures of these or films of them on TV or streaming channels, things about birds. They tend to be found in pretty good numbers out west, where there are prairie dog towns. Prairie dogs create holes, big holes, which the burrowing owls like to use to nest in when a prairie dog has vacated one of them. But believe it or not, they also nest occasionally in things like badger holes and other kinds of ground squirrel holes. And so that's why historically they were found in northwest Iowa. And I actually saw the last nesting ones up there in Lyon County in the years 2000 and 2001, and also photographed some nesting south of Sioux Center in the 1980s. Now, those birds have pretty well all gone from there. These are a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa, designated by DNR because of the loss of them. And now it's very, very rare to find one of these, except possibly an extreme northwest corner of Iowa where there's some short grass areas. And then we'll go to bobolinks, which are one of the most famous prairie open grassland birds. And back in the 70s, they were one of the most numerous birds you'd see and hear singing in a grassland or a prairie area. But since the 1970s, these birds, this species of birds has decreased by almost 70%. It has suffered some of the biggest losses of all the prairie birds in the Midwest and a lot of North America. That's due to habitat loss here in Iowa and throughout the Midwest in particular, but also in their wintering area. When they migrate south, they go to South America, the bulk of them to Argentina, which has been turning over into a lot more cropland, getting rid of a lot more grasslands. So it's what's going on in both North and South American grasslands that is causing birds like the bobolink, which migrate to South America, to really see such huge decreases in number. And now, believe it or not, we'll go to a kind of shorebird, and this might really surprise people too. Because when people talk about shorebirds, they're almost always thinking of a bird that they see along a marsh or a beach, or along an ocean shore, maybe a shoreline of a river, or shorelines of marshes and things like that, where there's some sandy soils where you'll see the shorebirds out dabbing around trying to catch food in the water. However, there are a couple of different varieties of shorebirds that actually don't spend much, if any, time in or near the water. And one of those birds that we have here in Iowa is called the upland sandpiper. And this is a very large shorebird. This bird stands almost a foot tall. And sometimes you will see it perched on a fence post, where I took this picture here. And they have also declined in huge numbers over the years because of the loss of grasslands in Iowa. They nest in all types of grasslands, but they prefer the short to mid grass prairies. So you see them more in western Iowa than you do in eastern Iowa. The further west you go, the more you'll find of them in the prairies. And they are a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa as well. And this is actually the nest. Most sandpipers all produce 4 eggs when they're nesting. And this is a shot of a nest of eggs in a prairie. I forget which prairie it was. I shot this picture years ago in northwest Iowa in a prairie that a couple of us were going through, and we happened to accidentally flush an upland sandpiper that was on this nest, and were able to find and photograph the nest. And then another bird that may surprise people a little bit about Iowa, but may know that it historically was in Iowa, and that was the greater prairie chicken, which really likes the western prairies. It was common in western Iowa, even into central Iowa at the time of settlement, and began disappearing, though, as it was hunted and as prairies were destroyed. And by 1963, it had been extirpated from Iowa, essentially extinct in the state, although it still appeared in other states out west. So it was considered extirpated in Iowa. But in the, I believe it was in the late 1990s, early 2000, Iowa DNR, some specialists there with prairie chickens started trying to reintroduce these into Ringgold County, which still had some of the best remaining prairie habitat for prairie chickens in all of Iowa. And there were still prairie chickens across the border in northern Missouri and some similar grasslands. So actually both Iowa and Missouri at that time began bringing in some more prairie chickens from Nebraska and Kansas and releasing them in Ringgold County in Iowa and in the Missouri conservation areas and nature conservancy areas just across the border into northern Missouri. And so over the last 20 years or so, we saw an increase in greater prairie chickens in southwest Iowa, down there near the border. But now in the last 2 or 3 years, they've really started to decline in numbers again. We're not quite sure of why they're declining, but we know that some of the grasslands are being lost down there in Ringgold County again. CRP grasslands that are funded by USDA. The funding of those in recent years has been cut back. So some of those are being plowed up again. And there's other reasons. It may be climate change may have something to do with it. DNR and others are still trying to study what's happening to the greater prairie chickens here in Iowa. And then we'll go to a species that is actually an endangered species in Iowa that historically nested in Iowa at one time. It's essentially gone as a nester from Iowa, but it does come in as a winter resident, and that is the short-eared owl, which you will sometimes see flying over a tall grass prairie, a short grass prairie, all kinds of prairies in Iowa and other grasslands, because it is hunting for gophers and mice and anything it can find running around in the grass as it's flying around. And usually in the late afternoon, if you're near a prairie in the winter, you will see maybe after 4 o'clock or so until dark, you may see some of these short-eared owls kind of flying like they fly like a giant moth over some of the grasslands. And so they are very rare in Iowa anymore, although they can be seen in Iowa because they do show up across the state and prairies as an Iowa winter resident. So now let's go to tall grass prairies because these are preferred by so many birds. Some of the short grass prairie birds we've already seen, plus some of the others we've seen, and a lot more birds that like to have taller grasses all around. This is a shot of, I believe this was taken at Spring Run Wildlife Management Area up in Dickinson County, which is approaching 5,000 acres of prairies and wetlands being restored by Iowa DNR, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Ducks Unlimited in Dickinson County. And so we'll go to the common grasses and plants that you'll find in tall grass prairies. That will include things like big blue stem grass, which is obviously one of the very most well-known tall grass prairie plants. Some of the other ones that are well-known and seen, switchgrass is another one. Another one is Indian grass. All three of these are going into full bloom and starting to produce their seeds right now at this later part of the summer. So you're really seeing in a tall grass prairie, you're really seeing these grasses starting to tower over the whole prairie now and start producing places for insects to roost and places for birds to hunt those insects and also find grass seeds to feed on. And other things that you will find in tall grass prairies, which you'll also find in lots of other prairies as well, are purple coneflowers, which are popular with insects, and the seeds are popular with birds, prairie birds, to feed on. Rattlesnake master, another one that is most common in tall grass prairie areas, and it is a very tall plant. And especially where a prairie has been managed with some periodic burning to restore the prairie, after the burning is done, this plant, the rattlesnake master, will come up in very large numbers. And I've seen some areas here in central Iowa that were burned this last spring that are just totally covered by these rattlesnake masters now, which again will produce food for insects and things that birds can feed on. And milkweeds, of course, which are, there's all kinds of milkweeds that can be found in all different places, not just in prairies, but common milkweeds, of course, are very common in tall grass prairies and other prairies as well. They are preferred by a lot of different butterflies that can feed on the beverages that are produced, the juices that are producing by these plants. Of course, they're extremely important for things like monarch butterflies, which are in extreme demand or extreme decrease across the country, about 90% lower than they were 20 years ago. But other butterflies like these will also use them. And of course, because there's insects that will feed on these, the birds will use these to feed on the insects that they're finding there. Cup plants, another interesting, very tall plant that is growing in full flowering in tall grass prairies right now. And it's kind of a sunflower-like plant, but you'll notice the leaves on these plants are kind of cup-shaped, and they kind of point towards the south and the north for some reason. So when you look at one of these, you'll see these leaves are aimed to the north and south. And then when it rains, like it did over quite a bit of Iowa this morning, these cup plants will actually capture a lot of water in those cup-shaped leaves. And then insects will come and feed on the water in there. And when there's insects in the water, birds will come and feed on the insects that are in that water. And they will also drink some of that water themselves. It's easy for birds to do. So that's an important plant for tall grass prairie birds to use. Prairie blazing star, another plant that's coming into full bloom right now, that can produce food for insects that insects like, and so you will see birds feeding on the insects on these plants sometime. There are other kinds of blazing stars, shorter ones, smaller ones that are found in mid-grass prairies and short grass prairies. There's, I think, about at least 4 different kinds that are found across Iowa. I may even be short of that. There may be more than that. But anyway, they're quite common and going into full bloom right now at this time of summer. And another thing, there's so many different kinds of sunflowers that are showing up now in the summer. And right now, as we're getting into August, we start to see some of the really taller plants growing. And probably one of the tallest ones is a plant called the Maximilian sunflower, very common on all our prairies. They're very easily reintroduced, sometimes just by seeds being carried to a restored prairie by birds carrying or insects carrying them from somewhere else. And a lot of insects, butterflies like to feed on these. The Maximilian sunflower is something that's actually named after a German aristocrat of some sort that happened to be touring the United States and went across Iowa and some other Midwestern states in the 1840s or 1850s in a carriage. Yes.
This is Brad. We can't see your slides right now. Would you?
Did it go off?
It did. So there we go. We're back.
Okay, it came back. I must, when I was swinging around to change slides, I must have accidentally hit that one and didn't realize it.
Thank you. Got it. Thank you.
Can we go back one or?
No, you were, I think, just keep going with the Maximilian. I think you got it.
Okay. So anyway, the Maximilian sunflower, again, a very tall one. It can grow to 7, 8, 9 feet or something like that sometimes. And again, it was actually first described by this German aristocrat that was here in the Midwest. And so it was named after him. His name was Maximilian. I forget the whole name. But anyway, it is very, very common in prairies and very important for birds. Common ironweed, another thing that's going in full bloom now, a very beautiful purple plant. You'll see in a lot of prairies, and insects are feeding on that, so you'll find birds feeding on the insects on them. Compass plant, another real tall one that also has extremely deep roots. The roots of these plants in the prairies can go down to 17 or 18 feet, and these grow very tall, again, producing seed for insects and birds. And so important. And now let's talk about some of the shows, pictures of some of the different birds that really are the key ones in our tall grass prairies. And one of those is called the Henslow sparrow. And this is a threatened species in Iowa, listed as threatened by the Iowa DNR. It could have been endangered, but fortunately, with the addition of CRP, what was that, 25 years ago by the USDA, NRCS, as farmers started to put in more grass prairies, especially tall grass prairies on their CRP, the Henslow sparrows started to restore in numbers in Iowa. Now they're still in low numbers, except in tall grass prairie areas, and large prairie areas is what they prefer. But if you go to places like Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge, or the big grasslands down in the Kettleson Wildlife Area down in Ringgold County, where the prairie chickens are nesting. That's also a place for the Henslow sparrow. In fact, it's an area that has so many Henslow sparrows that it was actually designated about 10 years ago or so as a globally important bird area by the National Audubon Society and global bird organizations. So that's an extremely important place for Henslow sparrows. It can be seen in some of the prairies here in central Iowa and northern Iowa as well, as long as it's a fairly large prairie. If you've got a prairie of 40 acres or more, you may be able to find a Henslow sparrow. And they want the grass to be pretty tall, and they want it to be 2 or 3 years old. So when a prairie is managed and occasionally has to be burned to get rid of the invasive species and restore the prairie, well, then for a couple of years, the Henslow sparrows will move out because they want to have a lot of dead grass understory under the tall grass as well. So they have a place to hide for nesting. This is a bird that can be kind of secretive and hard for people to find. Sometimes the only way you can find it is to hear it if you're close to it. It has a soft but distinct short little call, which I don't happen to have a recording of here to play for you today. But then we will go to one of the most well-known and most often seen birds of prairies and other grasslands all across Iowa, the whole Midwest, into the western prairies and even into the eastern prairies. It extends all the way from Illinois and Indiana clear into the Dakotas and western Colorado, almost everywhere you go in the Midwest. If you've got grasslands, pasture lands, even some croplands sometimes, if there's roadside grassy ditches, you will find the dick thistle. Yesterday, as I was driving around doing some birding and bird photography in Guthrie County, I'm guessing, I didn't do a formal count, but I guess in spending 2 or 3 hours down there, I probably saw at least 200 or 300 of these dick thistles, or heard them singing, perched on power lines or in plants out in the prairies and grasslands, or on roadside fences everywhere like this. And they're a very easy to recognize bird. So as you drive around any grasslands or even some agricultural areas, you will find that this is one of the most common prairie birds in Iowa. Now, it is, however, still listed as a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa by DNR. And that's because I believe it was in the 90s, this bird goes down to South America to spend the winter, the bulk of them in Venezuela in particular. And there was a lot of poisoning going on at that time to get rid of insects and birds on croplands in that part of South America. And tens of thousands, if not millions, of these birds were killed down there. So they started just dropping in huge numbers. But then around that time, there was international actions taken to get Venezuela and some other countries to stop doing this, and the birds began to recover. And we are seeing today a lot more of them in Iowa than we probably were 20 or 30 years ago. And again, it is one of the most common things you will see sitting out in open areas in Iowa, farmlands, grasslands, prairies, everywhere you go. Sedge wrens. Sedge wrens are little relative. They kind of look like the house wrens that might be found in your yard. They have a little bit different call, but they are found in prairies, especially where there are some shallow marshes in the prairie and there may be sedges growing around the edge of it, but also up into the grasslands, the tall grass prairies areas around it, even the mid-grass prairie areas. Then you will find the sedge wrens, sometimes perched up on a prairie plant, singing like this and nesting in those prairie grasslands, the native prairies especially. And another one that is now considered an endangered species in Iowa, which once nested in native prairies all over Iowa. It nests in a few areas yet, but relatively small numbers in Iowa. But if you've got a big native prairie, there may be a northern harrier that is nesting in the area. Now, during the winter, we do see a lot more of them migrate from prairies further north to come down here and spend the winter in Iowa, and you'll see them soaring around prairies just like the short-eared owls do in the afternoon. You'll see the northern harriers very often any time of day, especially in the morning, soaring around the native prairies. And they will hover over a prairie sometimes like this, very close to it, and then they will dive down and try to catch a mouse or a groundhog, not a groundhog, a smaller different ground animals, anything that they can find running around in the grass. In these prairies. And this is actually a photo I took of one hovering about to catch a little mouse in a prairie near Boone. That was back in April or May this spring, I believe. Then we will go to another type of prairie, and this is kind of what happens to prairie when they're not well managed and there are woodlands nearby, and you might start to find that there is some brushy succession into these native prairies. So this is sort of an early successional photo here of a prairie. This was down at the Chautauqua Greenbelt area in Polk County Conservation Board, manages a lot of this. DNR manages some of it as well. But this was a few years ago before some management was done. I took this picture to show some of the brushy vegetation starting to move into the native prairie there. But believe it or not, there are types of prairie birds that prefer this as well. So it's okay to have some brush coming into the prairie around the edge of the prairie, as long as it doesn't consume the whole prairie and take it over completely. So some things that you may have showing up in the native prairie that we have here in Iowa might be things like elderberry, and you'll very often see these growing in roadside ditches and farmland as well. But it is something that can creep into prairies sometimes. Common ninebark that can move out from the edge of woodland areas that are adjacent to prairies. American cranberry bush or viburnum, a variety of viburnum. There are several different viburnums in Iowa, but this is just one of them that can move out into the edge of a prairie sometimes. And all these things that I've just been showing you are berry producers. And of course, that's going to bring a lot of birds that like to feed on berries. And it can be prairie birds, and it can also be birds from the adjacent woodlands and other places that will come out and feed on these in these successional woodland prairies. Other things like gray dogwood. This is a thing that's normally found on the edge of woodlands in a lot of Iowa, especially western and northwestern Iowa. Well, lots of Iowa really, and it will tend to spread out into prairies a little bit. And then there are other things that will show up in these prairies in particular, but all kinds of prairies as well. And that's different types of goldenrods. Goldenrod and Canada goldenrod are two of the very common ones, giant goldenrod as well, that will show up in these types of prairies as well as tall grass prairies and others. And you'll find shorter goldenrods in other types of prairies. But these provide insect food. And the other thing is that they produce nesting materials for things like goldfinches. So this is very important for a lot of types of birds as well. So let's look at some of the types of grassland birds that prefer this kind of mixed grasslands that maybe has some shrubby areas coming into it a little bit, maybe some nearby trees and things. One would be the northern bobwhite, which was historically very common all across southern and eastern Iowa, actually way up into southeastern Minnesota, which is pretty well all gone from up in that area now. Still found across southern Iowa. This year I've been seeing and hearing quite a few more of them in central Iowa, where there's some good habitat. But they like, whoops, I need to go back again, hit that accidentally. They like this kind of mix of habitat. So they like to have some grasses, they like to have some brush, they even like to have a few nearby trees, not a whole lot of forest maybe, and even some grasslands a little, or some farmlands a little bit. They may be found in the edge of some crop fields if there's some grasslands next to them. And they've been in decline over the years across the United States. There's still a lot of research going into why they're declining. Declining here in Iowa, they are a game species, but DNR and of course the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are agencies that are taking very careful looks at these and want to make sure that hunting isn't overdone to reduce these accidentally. So this is considered a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa, even though there is a limited hunting season on them. And then a bird that a lot of people are not too familiar with, called the loggerhead shrike. It's a bird that nests across most of Iowa in the summer. It prefers grasslands, prairie grasslands in particular, that have a few shrubs growing here and there in it, because it likes to nest in the shrubs and perch in the shrubs, but then it flies around the prairies and the grasslands, and it tends to catch large insects in particular. Sometimes it'll catch butterflies, it'll catch dragonflies. Believe it or not, this is a bird that is actually nicknamed sometimes as a butcher bird, called a butcher bird because it will even sometimes catch a mouse, a lizard of some sort, and it has even been known on only a small percentage of its hunting, even to catch another small bird of some sort and eat it. And it will actually, it has small feet, so it's kind of hard to carry things around in it. It'll catch these and it'll take it to the nearest sharp thing that it can find, and it'll stick that food on that sharp thing. Now, it can be the edge of a stick of some sort on a shrub, or it can actually stick it on the edge of a barbed wire fence, on one of the points on a barbed wire fence. So sometimes if you see something stuck on a barbed wire fence like that, that may be because there's a loggerhead shrike in the distance that's hunting around somewhere, maybe using that to take parts of it as food to its nearby nest for its young as well. This is also a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa because it has reduced in great numbers over the years. It is a migrant. It heads south for the winter. It'll be found down in South Texas. If you ever go birding down there, you'll see a lot of them, but they come back up here into the Midwest in the summer to nest up here, but their numbers are way down in Iowa again. Then we'll go to the eastern meadowlark. Now, before I was talking just about western meadowlarks, the eastern meadowlark is one that is found most commonly in the eastern third of or half of Iowa. Basically from northeast Iowa to down towards southwest Iowa is where you will find the bulk of these. So once you get into central Iowa and start heading east, you'll find more and more eastern meadowlarks and far fewer western meadowlarks. Part of that is because the eastern meadowlarks likes the prairies and the meadows, but they also like to have the shrubs, and they perch in those shrubs a lot. So that's one reason you will see the eastern meadowlarks in these more prairies that are growing over to shrubs and other things. Field sparrow is one of the most common sparrows in areas that have shrubs around the edge or have shrubs that are extending into the prairies a little bit. They are a bird which really likes to perch on prairies and nest or on these shrubs and nest nearby. And they have a very distinctive call that sounds like a ping pong ball bouncing more and more rapidly. So when you hear something that sounds like a ping pong ball, getting more of a rapid call out in the prairie, that's a field sparrow that you're listening to. And then finally, one bird that probably very few people are even familiar with unless you're a hardcore bird watcher of some sort, and that's a little bird called a Bell's vireo, which is actually a southern bird. It extends into central Iowa. It's found across southern Iowa at the edge of these brushy prairies. But it is also found up into northeast Iowa on brushy prairie grasslands, into northwest corner of Iowa as well, up the Missouri River corridor, and maybe as far north as the Fort Dodge area. If you go to the Brushy Creek Wildlife Area, you'll find Bell's vireos nesting there too. But again, they like these prairies that are being overcome by brush that they can hide in, that they can nest in and raise their young. And so this is a bird that a lot of people aren't familiar with. It's one of several different kinds of vireos found in Iowa, but it's probably the least familiar with a lot of people. And then the common yellowthroat, which is one of the most common warblers in Iowa, and it is one that nests here all summer long. It is one of the early warblers to show up in the spring and one of the late ones to go out in the fall, and it actually sings all summer long. You can go out to a prairie grassland, especially if there's some shrubs around it or in it, and you can hear this little call that sounds like it's saying witchety, witchety, witchety over and over again, and that's this common yellow-throat warbler. It is also a species of greatest conservation need because although it is very common in Iowa, its numbers are declining like they are everywhere in all grasslands. It will migrate south for the winter, but it'll be back next year again, coming back to these preferred grasslands where there are shrubs in or around the edge. You'll also find them near stream beds where there's shrubs and other places as well. Even in backyards, they've shown up in the backyard where we live in Ogden as well. And then to the last type of prairie that I want to talk about, and that's a prairie that is actually a savanna. A savanna is a prairie that has scattered large trees growing in it. And this is popular with certain species of birds that are often just thought of as forest birds, but they really like these savannas. And the savannas are kind of dominated in Iowa by just a couple of major trees in particular. The bur oak would be probably the most dominant one in our prairie savannas. And another one, especially in the southern half of Iowa where there are prairie savannas, also shagbark hickory. Once you get into northern Iowa, if you have a savanna up in the northeastern part of Iowa or northwestern Iowa, you're not going to find the shagbark hickory, mostly just bur oaks. And sometimes they will have a few shrubs with them as well. Wild plum, another thing, this is a berry producing plant and will sometimes be in these savannas and other shrubby prairies as well. So these are areas for certain types of birds that like this mix of prairie and large trees. The lark sparrow is one that may not be quite as familiar with some people in Iowa as other sparrows are. It's quite a beautiful sparrow with its beautiful face pattern and head pattern, the rusty patch on the side of its cheek and the black spot in the middle of its chest. And it likes to have savannas where it will nest. And sometimes, though, you can even be out along a farmer's road, a gravel road somewhere. If there's a few oak trees growing along that road, you may happen to see some lark sparrows hop down out of the trees and onto the road in front of you. And as you go farther west in Iowa, you find more and more lark sparrows. They become less numerous as you go east in Iowa. They are a bird that is not in any danger in Iowa. And again, as you go further west, it's in larger and larger numbers. The American barn owl, however, is an owl that is an endangered species in Iowa. In the last couple of years, there have been a few more nests than there was in the last 20 or 30 years or so. I think there's up around 35 to 40 known nesting sites of these in Iowa now. They like to have prairies or grassland areas where there are a few scattered trees in particular. Of course, they're famous for nesting in old deserted barns, places like that. But in the wild, if there's nothing like that, if there are hollow trees in a prairie area, a savanna, then they will on rare occasions be found nesting in those areas too. So this is an endangered species which Iowa DNR and the Fish and Wildlife Service and other organizations, Iowa County Conservation Boards especially, have been trying to get to reestablish in savannas and other types of prairie areas in Iowa. And one that might surprise people because they might be familiar with it in many places is an orchard oriole, a little bit smaller than the more common Baltimore oriole, but the orchard oriole is actually very common. It is not a threatened species in any way in Iowa, but it likes to nest, especially in savannas. They like to have these savanna trees, these kind of open prairie areas with a few scattered trees in them. Some of the favorite places for them to nest. Now you'll find them in many other areas as well, but it just happens to be one of the birds that really likes savannas. And another one that may be extremely surprising to people is a red-headed woodpecker. But if you think about them, they like oak trees of any kind, whether they are dead, living trees. If they are scattered, that's even more popular with them. So if you've got an oak savanna, you will find red-headed woodpeckers living them everywhere where there's a savanna and many other kind of forested or edge of forested areas as well. It is a species of greatest conservation need in Iowa. And recently, because of the increasing amount of tree deaths in Iowa, many kinds of trees, ash trees and everything else, they're finding a lot more places where they can peck for insects that they feed on. And so we are starting to see red-headed woodpeckers show up in larger numbers here in Iowa in the last few years, although they still are a species of greatest conservation need. So now that we're kind of done with looking at some of the different birds, we'll just kind of start going to the end of what I want to talk about today. And that's other things that people can do other than just trying to restore an entire prairie, which is very important to prairie birds. But a dozen years or so ago, I think it was, that we had a new program that started right here in Iowa. A lot of it kind of led by a professor in Iowa State University, Professor Leah Schulte-Moore. Well known for USDA and conservationists in Iowa, even a lot of farmers in Iowa, because one of the programs that she got started was this prairie strips program, which can help farmers plant strips of prairie grasses through their crop fields, especially if their areas are a little bit hilly. It's a good idea to plant strips of prairies between your different fields or in parts of your fields to reduce the runoff from those farmed areas. And so strip prairies like this, prairie strips, will actually condense a lot of the nitrogen that might be running out of the crop fields and be headed for our rivers and streams, and will actually capture them in the root system of these prairie strips. So it will help reduce water pollution in Iowa, while it also can provide more homes for birds in cropland areas. Vesper sparrow, which is a fairly common sparrow in grasslands, even along roadsides now, but it really likes to nest for some reason in these prairie strips that are planted. And recently, this is a few years ago again, Iowa State University had an avian ecology research program that showed that native birds are at least 71% more abundant in fields that have prairie strips. rather than just strictly conventional fields. So that means you might have up to 9 or 10 different kinds of birds showing up in these prairie strips in the middle of your fields, not just 5 or maybe down to 1 or 2 species that would be the only ones seen in the crop fields. So prairie strips can be helpful everywhere. Also, about that same time, the University of Minnesota and the Nature Conservancy did a project up in Minnesota that confirmed grassland birds had a good response to conversion of agricultural fields to prairie, and that was very important for conservation in Minnesota. It's certainly very important for conservation here in Iowa as well. So things like savanna sparrows will do well anywhere there are grassland, prairie grasslands being restored. And one that I hadn't spoken about before, but is critical in tall grass prairie areas when it's migrating through Iowa. This goes up into Canada, northern Minnesota, the northern Dakotas, it nests up there, but then it comes through in the spring and fall and it stops in our prairies here in Iowa. And native prairies, tall grass prairies are what it really likes to be in. And I've been photographing these in Harrier Marsh Prairie, which is right at just about a quarter of a mile from where we live at Ogden, Iowa. It's a good place in the spring and fall every year to find LeConte sparrows and actually get photos of this bird, which can be kind of hard because of the way they tend to hide in these prairie grasses as they're migrating through. So just to kind of finish up a little bit and talk about recreating prairies for people who want to do that, if it's going to be done on former croplands or anywhere that it's done in Iowa, even if it's just a small prairie garden, you should usually use just locally or regionally grown native plant seeds. So don't get plant seeds from the prairies that are grown in Nebraska or Missouri or Illinois or Indiana. Get the native prairie plants that are native, specifically their varieties right here in Iowa, and plant those in our areas. They will do the best, and they will also serve the birds of Iowa the best of any kind that you can plant here. So again, that native plant diversity is just extremely important for bird diversity. And when agencies sometimes, like county conservation boards or Iowa DNR, have to occasionally patch burn parts of prairies to get rid of the invasive species and get the prairie plants restored, that can create a mixture of habitat variety, and then over a couple of years, actually improve the density of habitat that's preferred by a larger variety of grassland birds. And believe it or not, so can rotational grazing of prairie. If you have native prairie, but you want to graze it, rotate the grazing on it so that the cows for maybe a few weeks or a month or so will graze on the prairie plants in that area and then be moved to another portion of the prairie fenced off, allow the prairie they've been feeding on to come back and go on and move to the next prairie. And that will allow different kinds of grassland birds nest in both the areas where the cattle have been grazing and even in the area where they're just starting to graze. And so there was a phrase I saw a few years ago that I really liked and I've used and talked over the years when you're talking about cattle. I saw this and just love to say that what's good for the birds is good for your herds. So you manage your herds of cattle and prairies properly, and you're going to do a lot of good things for both the birds and the cattle. One of the things that's just come up in the last few years from the National Audubon Society was something that started out in North and South Dakota. That was a regional office of and still is a regional office of the National Audubon Society at that time. They began working with farmers who had prairies that they wanted to graze cattle on, and in order not to overgraze them, started working with them to rotate the grazing around in their prairie areas and use just more native plants for your grazing of the prairies, not use so many chemicals on the pastures that you might be using, and that would provide a much healthier and more variable or valuable meat for the farmers, who could then take it to special meat markets and get better prices for the beef that they're trying to sell. So you can see in this map that the National Audubon Society started working with a number of these places that are shown in the green dots, and they have more than that now in the Dakotas. And then those farmers could take their beef that was raised on these areas by National Audubon, working with National Audubon, and be sold through these local meat markets that could provide better meat prices for the farmers raising them. And then you'll see in the next few years, they started to spread into Wyoming and Colorado, New Mexico, and even out into California, Texas, into northern Missouri. And believe it or not, this is one of the big pieces of news that's just coming up. It hasn't really been made public yet, but Iowa DNR and the National Audubon Society have agreed to co-fund a new person in Iowa that's going to do this for the National Audubon Society here in Iowa, working with ranchers in Iowa to work better in their native prairie grasslands, rotating their cattle and doing better care for their herds, and then producing places in Iowa, private meat markets that might be able to provide the sale of their beef for better prices, for better, maybe a little higher cost for the consumer, but healthier meat, and also better profits for the ranchers trying to raise that. And even in communities, sometimes native vegetation can be planted to help native birds. Believe it or not, this is a little prairie park in Boone, Iowa, in the city of Boone. Now, this picture is about 10 years ago. It's got quite a bit of shrubs coming into it right now, some other prairie plants as well, but it's still there, and it's actually housing some prairie birds right there in this prairie park that is within the city limits with housing all around it in Boone. And you can use prairie plants in your backyard as well. This is just one little scene in my own backyard in Ogden, where we have just a little prairie garden in the northwest corner of our yard. And then we have a lot of native trees that we plant in our yards as well. Well, it's really made our whole yard a real great habitat for all different kinds of birds that come into our yard. So that's something you can do and add prairie plants to your yard as well. Now, just to kind of finish up with a couple of things, one of the ways that you might want to learn about what kind of native plants to plant for birds of all kinds. Now, this can be native trees for forests. It can be native shrubs, flowers, grasses, whatever plants you like to plant wherever you live, any place in the United States. You can go to this website link for the National Audubon Society, www.audubon.org/native-plants, and that will take you to this website below. And you can go down here and simply type in your zip code and type on, then hit find plants, and it will take you to all the kinds of trees, shrubs, flowers, native plants, grasses that are the best to plant for your area, and what types of birds it will attract for those plants in your area. And you can do this for the whole United States, whether you're in a forested area, a prairie, or wherever it is. So I'd suggest trying that out, and then you can also work with your local city or county, or either a city or a county, to become officially designated in Iowa as a bird-friendly Iowa community. We currently have about 22 communities, and I think about 9 or 10 counties in Iowa right now that are certified as bird-friendly communities, which 2 years ago became part of a much bigger international network now called the Bird City Network that covers both the northern and southern west part of the Western Hemisphere. So it covers the United States, Mexico is part of it now, also Colombia, and Brazil has recently joined it. But you can go to the Bird Friendly Iowa and Bird City Network site and then look up Bird Friendly Iowa. And you can also find tools on there on the Iowa portion of these websites that will tell you what kind of plants to plant for your native birds, and what kind of birds that you want, and what kind of plants you should plant for those. So you can do it either way on the National Audubon website or the Bird Friendly Iowa website. So to finish up, we're just again saying that saving and restoring native prairies and those plants can save and restore our native birds. And a few years ago, Marshall Johnson, who was the guy that started the program in the Dakotas, working with the grazers on native prairies, and he has since become the National Audubon Society's Chief Conservation Officer. He came up with this phrase, which I've used in programs again: you are what hope looks like to a bird when you're doing it with your prairie plants or whatever it might be. So that is the end of my program. And now we can turn it over to Brad. And however you want to handle any questions people might have from here on.
Sounds
And
great.
what I need to do too.
You're fine, Doug. We can change over if Bree wants to do that, that's fine. Otherwise, we can leave your last slide up too. It doesn't matter. Just
Okay.
wanted to say thank you very much, Doug. We can tell you are passionate about the birds and the plants that they live in and on. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. I know we've run over a little bit in time, so I know if people have to go, I totally understand. But I think there's a couple questions that we might want to get to. Do you want to cover those, Bree, or do you want me to get that?
Yeah, I can grab them. I was answering a couple of questions as I went as well. So at the very top, before we got started, we can start there. We had one person interested to hear about suggestions to reduce birds flying into their picture window. They Google possibilities, but they have 5+ birds daily that hit their window.
Yeah, that's really a problem with windows everywhere. And surprisingly, while there's a lot publicized on what hits tall buildings in major cities, it's actually a larger number of birds hit the windows of homes and small businesses. And it really takes things that you have to do, either having a screen on the outside of your window or certain types of things that will scare birds away. There are different types of stripes that can be purchased and pasted on outer windows that are hit frequently. There's a number of different tools that you can find, and simply go on Google and look up those things, and you will find places that tell you how to do that, or can actually sell you the supplies to do that.
Okay. And then the next question we had from Carrie, are any of Doug's photos published? Where could I find them?
There have been a few published by DNR over the years. Most of them are by Iowa Audubon, but we really don't, not many of those have been published. If somebody would like to use those for something, I'm happy to share them with somebody if they are interested in publishing them for something. I don't charge anything. I just ask a credit for the photos if they're being used.
Is there a list of those flowers and birds mentioned today that they could refer to?
A list of them that were on my program. I don't have a specific list made up of those, but if you go online to a list of native prairie plants for Iowa, you can find all kinds of pictures and information about those easily.
I wanted to just jump in here too a minute, just to say that this will be posted. This presentation will be posted on our our YouTube webpage. I'm not certain how soon, but it will be posted, so you can review that in terms of specific species. You could flip through then as quickly through that as well to check those out. I also wanted to point out though too, Doug, the link that you gave to the Audubon site that showed what birds like what flowers or what plants might be another tool that this person could utilize to find what plants to use.
Absolutely, yeah, right, for your area, for any area you live, yes.
Right. I don't have any other questions, just some very nice thank yous to Doug for all of the information.
Perfect. Well, if there are no more questions, I know we're a little bit over, which is totally fine. I want to say again, thank you very much to Doug. It was great. I love hearing about this. I learned a lot about the different birds and where they like to spend their time. And I got work to do in my yard. So with that, everyone, thank you all for attending. And in 2 weeks' time, Bree will be talking about planting natives in your own landscape. So please join us or check out some of the other field days that we have going on. Thank you all.
And thank you, Brad.
Thank you.